This is a short introduction to editing files and copying files from GitHub and using VS Code as your editor of choice when you're writing CPM applications. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is look at the directory, and what I'm going to do is, in fact, I'm going to go across to the B drive. And in the B drive, there is a C file called hello world. In fact, if I go and type helloworld.c, you can see the file there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an editor which is installed onto the SD card, and we're going to open helloworld.c. Okay, so now I've loaded up helloworld.c into the WordMaster editor. The next thing I need to go and do is I need to change the input mode the terminal is using. At the moment, by default, it is using line input mode, so you type in a line of text, press the enter key, and that would send that line, when you press the enter key, to the Altair Emulator for it to interpret. So what we need to do is we need to switch it into character mode or WordMaster mode. So the way you do this, you can see up on the top of the screen, there's a hint up there, press Control L. So we press Control L and you'll notice we're now in WordMaster mode. And what this means is that each character I move, each cursor movement or character I type will be sent then and there. So you can see I'm moving around with the cursor, and we will come over to hello, and surprise, surprise, I'm going to enter the word world, if I can spell correctly. Okay, so I've entered hello world, and I'm just going to turn insert off, and you can page up and down for the file. So if I go and press Control C, you can see that I'm navigating through the file to make changes. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press the escape key, and that will take me to the WordMaster command line, and I'm going to type E for exit, and exit will also save the contents of that file. And I'm going to link it, so I'm going to compile it, so I go hello cc hello world, and I will go clink hello world. Okay, and if I go and run hello world, and then kill that pretty quickly, you'll see we've got hello world now there from that change we made. Alrighty, so that's the way in which you can go and use WordMaster to make simple changes to files. Now, it obviously works when people used it back in the 80s, but it is a little bit painful. So I'm going to show you a couple of other ways in which you can deal with files. So I'm going to go to the A drive. In fact, I've still got the character input mode set to WordMaster. I normally try and set that back to default. Default will work better for you. So we're going to go pip, and I'm going to go the D drive equals, and the file is called gf.com. And we'll go across the D drive, and in there we should see we've got gf. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in gf. And you'll see in here we've got a number of endpoints that are predefined. The first endpoint is if I want to get a file of immutable storage on the Azure Sphere. Now there are a limited number of files on there. The next endpoint is for GitHub, and in GitHub it points off to a repo of retro games. So this is the repo that I just showed you a moment ago. So this is the repo of games here. And I'm going to select the endpoint 1 for GitHub, and the file I'm going to pull over is called love.bas, and you notice you have to make sure it matches the case of the file in the repo. Right, if I now go and type in love.bas, and you can see there goes the application I just pulled across. In fact, if I now go in dir, you'll see I've got love.bas. And if I go and load up mbasic from the A drive, and I'm going to load up love. And it comes up here, prompts you a message, and I'm just going to put in a message, Raspberry Pi, because everybody loves Raspberry Pi. And what this does is it generates like a postcard, and these were very popular in the 80s and 90s, was a popular design, and this is a little simple little application to go and do that. So that's how you can go and get applications out of GitHub. And you might notice that there is a file not found, and the way to fix that is for these retro games is you need to go and get file, and you need to select option 1, and you need to pull over a file called menu.bas. And if I now go and run mbasic love and Raspberry Pi, and then I'm going to exit out of that, you'll see that it's now found the file. Okay, so I'm back to the D drive, And what files I've got on there? Well, I've got 3 files on there now. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is how you can pull files in from Visual Studio Code. So I've got an application here. In fact, this is the source code for Get File itself. And there's a bit of code there. And the way this works, it talks through Intel I/O ports to basically pull the file through byte by byte through the Intel CPU software emulator and into the file system. So that's kind of roughly how this works. Now, what I'm doing is I'm using an extension called Live Server File 5 Server. And this is a new implementation of Live Server extension for Visual Studio Code. And it's really used for web developers. So you're creating a website and you're inside Visual Studio Code and you go and press save, it'll automatically refresh a web page for you. And it provides a nice way in which you can go and do that. But in this situation, the way I'm using Live Server is it's also a great way of providing an HTTP endpoint to the files in this project. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close the server and I'm just going to go live. So down the bottom, I did that reasonably quickly. Down the bottom right-hand corner of Visual Studio Code, you'll see it's now gone live. And then what that did, as you would have spotted, in my browser, it brings up, there goes my endpoint, and these are all the files that I have in that project. So the next thing I'm going to do is, in fact, before I do that, I just want to explain something first. You don't want to use localhost because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the endpoint onto the Azure Sphere device or the Altair Emulator running inside the Azure Sphere. And of course, localhost on that device would be localhost on that device, which is clearly not what you want. You want to point to the IP address of your desktop computer, in which case you can see I'm 192.168.10.205 and it's on port 555. And we're going to copy that. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the emulator. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in GF and then I'm going to put GFEP for endpoint. And this allows me to go and paste in the endpoint. I actually used Control-Shift-V to paste that in. And now if I go to GF, you'll see that I've got a new endpoint. 192.168.10.205, 5555, which is the endpoint for the web server that's running in the context of Visual Studio Code. And inside Visual Studio Code, let's have a look at the files I've got. Well, okay, I'll pull across this GF file, which is the source code for GF. We will drop that down, and I'm going to select 2, which is the endpoint for VS Code, and I'm going to go and put in gf.c. And that pulls the app or the source code into the CPM file system, and you can see if I go type.gf.c, there goes the code. And then if I go to the B drive, I can go CC and D and GF. So I'm going to ccompile, stop the C compiler on the D, and I want to point it to the file on the D drive, the GF file on the D drive. And the next thing I need to go and do is link to GF. So link the GF file, and if I now go to the D drive, you'll now see that I've got a new file called gf.com, which is actually already there, but it's just a new copy. And surprisingly, if I go and run it, you'll see that's it's now running the application. So those are the ways in which you can edit files. So you can use WordMaster. You can go and use a GitHub endpoint. You can actually go and this option 2, where I've set up my own endpoint. I could have actually pointed to my own personal repo of games or files I was working on. But my preference is generally to just fire up Visual Studio Code on my desktop and just pull files in from the local endpoint. Anyway, hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea how you can edit files and copy files from GitHub and use Visual Studio Code as your source code editor. Cheers.